All right, so I know this is going back a handful of slides, but where we left off talking about was almost to the end of this list. And I go back, excuse me. I go back to this list for a couple reasons. One, again, just to reiterate that there's a lot of terminology coming out of this chapter and a lot of lists coming out of this chapter. While I will hardly ever ask you to reiterate a list to me of something, it is, unfortunately, if nothing else, a list of more vocabulary words at the very least, okay? So you should have an idea of at least what each of these means, let alone, some examples when applicable. So we started the other day, as I said, talking about some evidence for evolution. Why can we believe these folks when they tell us that evolution is a thing? Or more so, okay, what is their data, their evidence for their hypothesis, their theory that they put forward? Okay, that originally is a hypothesis and then supported with this data. So going back to the very first day of class when we talked about scientific method, this is that. All right? This is that. So we have the branching organization of life, which we talked about. And let's just get this into full screen and we'll walk through these just real quick and catch up to where we left off. So the branching organization of life, we reminded you of the kingdom, phylum, order, family, class, blah, 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 blah. Okay? We talked about that. And they feel that nesting, those subfolders, file cabinet, however you want to think about it, is a first line of evidence. Then we talked about the fact that a lot of underlying bone structure is similar, okay? And that's just looking at hard parts. If you've ever done dissections in biology class, whatever grade, you know that there is a lot of carryover as well. We all need a handful of the same things to do to carry out life, as so on and so forth. And they're all more or less arranged the same way. Varies with body cavity and so on and so forth. But as a side shoot, we explained what analogous means. Analogous isn't part of the lines of evidence, but when we talk about homologies, we want to talk about analogies as well. Analogous, slightly different than analogies. Analogous features as well. Vestigial structures, back to our list. We talked about those, your appendix, your tailbone, so on and so forth. Whales and snakes have hips, another one. And then we got up to here where we talked about embryonic development. Okay. And we showed you that not only do we all share a very similar developmental structure, but in organisms like us, where some of those features are arguably not even necessary, they're still retained. You could argue, well, duh, a fish is going to have gills at some point during its development because it needs gills when it gets, But mammals, okay, who once they're fully formed don't have the gills, we still see those show up. It's just, I hate to say that in this way, but as part of the programming, okay? In genetics, you hear when folks talk about genetics over and over again, it is just a computer code that the cells are running, putting stuff together. It's instructions, okay? It's far from my end of biology, but I understand a decent amount of it. Which leads us to convergence, which we haven't talked about yet. All right, so this is the new one and the last one on that list. So what ecological convergence tells us that in similar environments, but vastly in similar separated environments, the same types of organisms tend to develop, tend to evolve. The classic example is the placentals versus the marsupial mammals. Okay, we are placental mammals. Everything you know, for the most part, is a placental mammal. You know the word placenta. Versus marsupials, those are the critters with the pouches. All right, and as we indicated the other day, they carry out the very last stage of development, marsupials, in the pouch, as opposed to, I'm sorry, I'm yawning again, as opposed to coming out arguably more or less ready to go for a placental. All right. There are way better ways of looking at it, because I don't want you just to think that placental versus marsupial is the only type of convergence that we see. All right. It is far from true. But more so, think about it that in a shoreline environment, okay, whether it's saltwater or freshwater, you're going to need a type of creature who's used to not only getting really, really wet, but also occasionally drying out, and they can deal with that. All right, and in so on and so forth. If you live in trees, organisms that choose to live in trees are always going to need a certain set of characteristics. Obviously, a way to get onto and off of the tree, be it flying off or climbing off, and you're always going to see whether they're, all placentals, for that matter, you're going to see these same necessary characteristics. So I'm just trying to get across the point there that it is the environment that's calling for certain criteria if you want to live there, okay? And that's really the gist there. But the fact that wherever we look across the world, we see that that's the case. You're not all of a sudden going to look to some part of the world and find a fish living in a tree, all right, or a squirrel living at the bottom of the sea, sandy aside. But, so, that's the idea. And as I said, I went through and reiterated that list because guess what? The next slide is another freaking list. All right? Sorry. So evolutionary mechanisms. How does evolution work? How does it happen? Well, we've got 4 lines that we want to talk about. 4 mechanisms. 4 tools. It's a number of ways you can say it. I've mentioned this first one several times, mutation. The hardest thing in this conversation is thinking about a mutation as a good thing, as favorable versus, say, unfavorable. Because, and I know I've said this 3 times and nobody laughed at the joke the first 3 times, you never walk, by and say, hey, nice mutation. It just, you don't say it. We always think of a mutation as a negative thing. We have to entertain the idea that in some circumstances, a mutation can be a beneficial characteristic. It could produce a beneficial characteristic. This internal or external is really talking about a cause. It could just be duplication error, okay? Or it could be caused by some external source. The classic one we always talk about is radiation. Radiation damages cells' ability to reproduce, and once they get radiated, they tend not to do things the way they were supposed to. But in the end, Mutation is the ultimate source of genetic variation. Eye color is like usually the first thing they turn to. I don't know how they proved this, but somebody at some point, said the first eye color was this. I want to say brown. Don't quote me though. Okay, and then blue was a mistake, but it was favorable. Oh, look at those blue eyes. Da, 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 da. All right, it just goes from there. Hair color, hair, whatever you want to call it, texture. Mutations can be beneficial, neutral, or harmful. Eye color is a great one that we could argue is neutral. Hair color, neutral. So what we see is that 2 out of the 3 of these, it's very easy for them to stay in the gene pool and become magnified over time. It's really just the harmful ones that tend not to stick around too long. And the other and last point we want to make is that mutations are random. Might not seem horribly relevant, but they always like to point that out. So that's the first way evolution can work. We get a variety of, we get new genes in the gene pool. I'm saying gene pool. You guys know what a gene pool is, right? We haven't technically had that conversation yet. That is the sum of all the different genes in a population. Okay. All the variability and variety. Because we need that to understand migration. That's when we take some of your gene pool and move it over into a different population. You may be introducing a brand new flavor of something or another. If it is beneficial or at the very least neutral, it stays. Sometimes the most benign things can be seen as beneficial simply for their novelty because they're new, right? How does migration happen? Well, again, it's hard not to think about this in humanistic terms. We have any number of reasons why we would change populations, why you would suddenly pack up your stuff and leave wonderful Utica and move to Miami or I can't think of another city for some reason. I'm trying to go out somewhere by Wisconsin or whatever. But you get my point, okay? In nature with critters, it's not quite like that at all. Again, we're not going to sit and argue levels of consciousness and so on and so forth and cognitive thought in a squirrel. But they often have other sort of pressures. Okay, limited food, for example, or they may have some characteristics which, make them sort of at the bottom of the pecking order in their population. And they just say, you know what? Again, the squirrel equivalent of hell with this, I'm going on a walk. And they end up in a new population where that same characteristic might just prove, not to be so bad. Or at least move them up a notch to neutral. So, and it could be something as simple as, again, a forest fire, and everyone who's still alive runs out of that forest. Any number of things. But it's hardly ever like what works for humans. Genetic drift. We've talked about this over and over again, but without using this word. These words. This is that sampling error. Again, we know that the Punnett square is always supposed to do a certain ratio. Well, you know what? Every so often it doesn't work out that way. I told you we had the one lab that we did in historical geology, where we had red beads and blue beads, and I forgot the name of the theory. Somebody's theory. It tells you that you should get this amount of, and it wasn't like like Bob Punnett or anything like that, but you should get this amount of blue and red, this amount of blue, and this amount of red. There's a ratio you should get. Oh, and it's just jumping out of my head. But we did that several times in the classroom, let alone several times over many years. I did it, watching the students do it. And there is a little bit of fluctuation here and there. This, much like mutations, is random. It is pure chance. What else? So you're playing Monopoly, okay? And you're not supposed to roll a 1, 3 times in a row, but sometimes it happens. That's what this is. Or a 6 3 times, whatever. And that, when these organisms live for, a certain amount of time, that can shift things for a couple generations often. And if it ends up being a beneficial thing, then it stays in even longer. And it's just pure chance. Genetic shuffling of the cards. And this is an opportunity to slide in, talking about Punnett squares and whatnot here, slide in a couple more vocabulary because you needed more. Just a reminder, you've heard these words before. Living environment, or when last time you took that, right? Bio, if you took it here. Genotype and phenotype. Phenotype is what you see. Genotype is what you don't see. Okay, in a nutshell. Genotype makes the phenotype. But phenotype is the external manifestation of the genetics. Brown eyes, brown hair, so on and so forth. Flush. Going back to the Punnett squares, when you probably heard it, this is the pea plants, the pink ones. What did they do? I forget what the classic thing was. Pink and white, and then red and white. They didn't get pink; they got striped or something, or was it vice versa? You guys had biology a lot more recently than I did, but it was a different expression of the genetics, and they thought a blending would occur, but I think it didn't. So it's only been so long since we've been able to, look at genes. We did map the human genome finally, 10 years ago, maybe, thereabouts. We haven't done too many other critters. It's been in the news recently with the woolly mice and whatnot. We have mapped the mouse genome. In case you don't know, they're trying to use, they're using mice as lab rats, unfortunately. They're trying to bring the woolly mammoth back. They've been trying to do this for a long time. It was a fairly recent organism as far as extinctions go. And it turns out there's a elephant alive somewhere over in Asia, and it's not the Asian elephant, that is like really, really close genetically to. And the other thing is of course, because we find a lot of these woolly mammoths and mastodons very well preserved, just recently, from the last ice age. So they're actually getting chunks of meat and whatnot. So they're trying to make this, a lot of words get used, chimera, and again nowadays transgenic, and so the mouse is, I guess, a good place to start. So they made this really fuzzy mouse. I don't know if you saw it in the news. It's interesting. So they get the coat to grow. The biggest problem, this is the old Jurassic Park conundrum, is it's one thing to make a woolly mammoth, but we've got to make food that the woolly mammoth likes as well. So it's not we could just assume that they'll appreciate whatever elephants eat in the wild. But I suppose we could always make Purina mammoth chow. I don't know. But so it's not just as simple as recreating these things. But at any rate, so we used. Moving on. That was from the last conversation. Classic geneticists use phenotypes to deduce the function of genes. We look at the outside, and we assumed that there was some sort of programming inside. Again, this goes right back to Gregor Mendel and the pea plants. Okay, we couldn't. Oh, that's where I started. How I got off that silly little tangent. We haven't been able to look at genetics until very, very, very recently. We could figure out, a little bit. They understood that something in there had to be responsible for this programming. Something going on when we put these things together. We figured it out fairly early to some extent, again, with dogs, cats, right? We did a lot of selective breeding with them. Moved on to many other farm animals, okay? But again, we were doing that well before we were actually looking at genetics, and it was trial and error, again, on phenotype. We want a dog that is this and is that. Behaviors, it's almost, I don't know that they could throw behaviors under phenotypes, but that was also something that we were breeding for selectively. Chickens and the meat that they give out, okay, is another way we've bred stuff. So, we've been doing this for a very long time with little to no understanding of how it was actually working. One hopefully could argue that it's better now that we have a understanding of how it works. Could at least be more directed, if not more artificial. Last but not least, natural selection. Now, we heard this word earlier, and again, it might be hard to think about this as a tool, as a process, yes, but as a methodology that leads to something else, no. We always have thought of this as its own thing. So natural selection puts forward the idea that differential survival and reproduction, or just differential reproduction, that's the and or there, of different genotypes in a population leads to changes in the gene frequencies of a population. I don't think any of you would or could argue with that. Okay? You know that genes exist. You know you possess genes. You know your genes make your characteristics. And you know when you get to the point in your life where you reproduce, you're going to pass on some of those characteristics. They're going to mingle with the other half. And that offspring is going to have those genetics. None of you, does anybody doubt that? Of course not. Okay, I'm trying to prove a point here, so bear with me. So you have absolutely zero problem with the first bullet, correct?
Okay, great. So, do we have variation? Look around the room. Do we have variation in here? Yes, of course we do. Do we have differential reproduction? Is everyone going to reproduce equally in here? Nope. Probably not. Some of you may not even reproduce. Some of you may have 7 kids. Who knows? And you just told me you believe in heredity, right? Okay. Then you believe in natural selection. Trapped you. Gotcha. And again, this isn't typically the evolution that people say they have problems with. But it's a big part of it. It's a big, big part of it. I think when it's presented in this go for broke kind of format sometimes, again, the monkeys lined up and a person at the end of it, you know, that's just looking to put people off right off the bat. Again, I think they were trying to prove a point, okay, but I think they really got off on the wrong foot there. Because if you just step back and present things in a clear, sort of straightforward manner, you see that they do agree, they do understand, so on and so forth. So, this slide, and I've been meaning to change this for way too many semesters. This slide seems like it's really out of place here. I think I have a reason for leaving it. We'll see in a couple slides if I'm right. Because I'd like to think I would have moved it a couple years ago. So we talked about this under homologies, okay, homologous features, not adaptations. Say adaptations, homologous features. This is the same twist a different twist at the same idea. All right, so convergent evolution tells us that similar characteristics will appear because of similar environmental challenges. This might make two. Oh, no, it did continue the video. Good. All right, so picking up from after that pause, sorry. So convergence, we see the bat, the bird, and the fly. We're talking about, obviously, the wing here. Now, where this differs from homologous, okay, is that, obviously, the fly in this case, glaring example, doesn't show, well, any bones, for starters, all right? And the bird, we see some variances as well there. But we see the development of wings, okay, a much broader overview. We're not looking at the underlying development here. And what's neat about convergent evolution, and I think it was just in this previous slide here, and I glazed over it without really thinking about it. No, it doesn't mention it here. You've got totally different genetics responsible, potentially, in each of these cases. All right, it's not like we're, especially when we look at the fly wing, okay? And it's really neat to see that nature can come up with several different recipes, so to speak, for making a wing. And it does so, again, because there's a niche. It's really, at this point, we've been talking about evolution so long,
that you forget perhaps what chapter we're in. The idea that we're talking about niches and species and populations. All right, we're trying to, on a very long tangent, but trying to point out that all of that variation, all of those niches can be filled, excuse me, because evolution provides for that. So again, what I just pointed out to you, we're really looking at an analogous here, separate evolutionary origins, but superficially similar because they evolved to fill the same function, serve the same purpose. I think what I really just need to do is move these back, but so now we are on homologous, homologous, I should say. Characteristics of different organisms are similar because they're inherited from a common ancestor that also had that characteristic. I talk about them in different ways. I don't know. And we give a completely different example here. We're going to talk about tetrapody, all right, or the fact that a huge number of organisms have 4 appendages. We have arms and legs. Your dog or your cat has 4 legs. We tend to call them all legs. Let's jump. Turtles have 4 legs. You could even argue, at least in a lot of fish, not all of them, that they've got the beginnings of this. There is a branch of fish that led to amphibians. All right, so not all fish, but we see the beginnings of tetrapody in fish. And again, this should have been, I'm going to do this on my office hour. I'm probably going to just quit saying, I ought to do this. I'm going to move this back to when we talked about the placentals versus the mammals. It really would have been applicable then. So we see the printing's kind of hard to read. It's even hard to read from my close view. Flying squirrel. And we've got flying phalanger. Phalanges is a finger. The groundhog, the wombat. The anteater, the anteater. Well, anteater with a pouch. Mole and mole, mouse and mouse. Okay, so they don't always change names. But we see mice with pouches and mice without pouches. We see moles with pouches, moles without pouches. Anteaters. I'd say our anteater is arguably much more anteater looking than theirs. But nonetheless, if he enjoys ants, then God bless, right? Wombat and groundhog. I never really considered wombats and groundhogs as the same critter. But again, they fill the same niche. Groundhogs should be out pretty soon. I haven't seen anybody seen a groundhog out along the road yet? Yeah, they're still frozen in. Hopefully after these next couple days, if nothing else, the flooding will reap them up and out of their burrows. As all that snow finally melts and we're supposed to get some rain, so. This, we were just talking about bringing back the woolly mammoth. This guy's actually on the list as well. The Tasmanian wolf. This is one of the last. It was in the Tasmanian Zoo in the 30s. And very cool looking critter. Might remind some of you of a hyena. It's got that mix of solid and stripes going on there. But again, a marsupial, so it would have a pouch. And they pretty much hunted them to extinction, same story as always. But the geneticists out there, the mad scientists that we have left in that realm at any rate,
working on it.
Trying to see if the name is in here. Yeah, thylacine. So thylaceus, cynocephalus, but thylacine. If you Google that, you'll see, because it literally was just in the mouse article. I should give you guys the mouse article, read it for extra credit or something. But ferocious, predatory, dull-witted marsupial. Kangaroo masquerading as a wolf. Yeah, that's some pretty horrible vintage writing there. But that's how we were back then. So, yeah, again, what benefit would this be? Well, think of it as like when we reintroduced wolves into certain parts of our wild. As you're probably aware, they took wolves out of the food chain in the 40s, 50s-ish in many parts of the world because we wanted to let our cows roam free and so on and so forth. They introduced wolves back into Yellowstone, I think it was. Probably the 80s, if not the 90s. Might have been the 90s. And they remarkably went back into the food chain and reestablished themselves. Mainly, I think, because another we haven't used this word yet, but keystone predator didn't move in. That's the next chapter. We start talking about that. Apex predator, you guys would know it as. But they also serve there's another, keystone is also sort of like just in a building. It's the foundation. Predators can really keep the whole ecosystem in check. But anywho, so it's imagine a lot, not just can we do this, which of course there's always a little bit of that in some, especially these mad scientist types. But and I say that lovingly. I'm not maligning them by calling them mad scientists. But ideally, they're going to fit them right back into the food chain, and the farmers can just put up some damn fences.
It's sad seeing them just on a slab of concrete too.
Oh, I know. Well, and that's another thing. I mean, we've there's a whole. Say some people don't care, but
I'm glad we moved past from that though.
I was just going to say there's the whole argument about zoos, yeah, and we've been rehabitating the zoos little by little. Utica Zoo's done a real good job of it. The biggest thing that people had issue with not only was these kind of organisms and the bears and whatnot walking around on concrete, the tigers and whatnot, but the monkey houses in particular. And little by little, you see the monkey houses close and come up with these new habitats for them. I mean, they still need to have some form of shelter, and that's going to be, unfortunately, kind of boring. But they come out with these more and more. Syracuse has a really nice one. Just much more.
I think they have like the lemur enclosure, right?
What's that?
I think they have lemurs over there, right?
They got a lot. Yeah, somebody had lemurs.
I forgot if it was Syracuse or not, though.
It's been a while since we've been to Syracuse, and they had a big changeover last time we were there. I'll stare at the monkeys all day long, and I call generically monkeys. Just any sort of four-legged creature with a cute face and a tail. I call a monkey, but they, my family doesn't have the patience for standing in front of the monkey cages like I do. But so I often don't get to do that as much as I used to. But they, I don't remember. I don't doubt it, but I don't remember specifically lemurs there. But I don't doubt it. But yeah, so yeah, on the concrete is rough, and especially again for your last year species. But we didn't think that way back then, by any means. I'm sure there was always a handful of people that said, "Oh, that poor puppy needs some grass," but they weren't sure as hell weren't running the zoos. They were thinking of we got to clean the poop off and stuff like that. So. But and also it is Australia. I don't know Hobart's climate necessarily, but arguably they might not even have grass. But still, he could have had sand, something, dirt.
Maybe even a tree.
There you go.
So yeah, I think the one that's pacing, I don't know. We had video back then, but I don't know if this is put together. This looks too fluid to be stills laced together. So I think this was early film, but yeah, just pacing around, showing the typical pacing you see in zoos and whatnot. Quite bored by that yawn. So at any rate, there may be Tasmanian wolves in the near future. I don't know that one is developed, and I don't know why that leg in color shows up in this little cycled clip here. It's really odd. Here it comes in a second. Come on. I'm sorry, several seconds. There it goes. I have no idea why that's there, but I didn't make the video. All right, so I am not going to put another PowerPoint on the test, all right? But we have a decent amount of time left, and we ought to attempt to kill it in some semi-productive manner. So I'm going to show you guys a short video, somewhat silly video, but that reinforces some of the more important points that we talked about. Thought I pressed stop. Oh, yeah, pause. I want to